Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Gane versus Tuivasa, and we have another international card on our hands. For the first time ever, the UFC is taking place in Paris, France, just a couple years after the legalization of MMA in France. So some pretty exciting stuff, but you do have to wonder and maybe be a little concerned with how the commission is going to look over there. Apparently, we already had a fight scrap because of some arbitrary rule regarding, I think, fighter records and stuff. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some fuckery with the judging and maybe even the reffing. That said, though, I think the matchups do seem solid. There are a number of hometown fighters on the card, but they're not really getting the London treatment here in that, there's not a lot of soft matchups, in my opinion. Obviously, I think the main event is a bit lopsided, but I don't think Tuivasa is any bum. Imavov Buckley should be a fun fight. Buckley, I don't think, is a pushover by any means. Zarah Fairn versus Ailin Perez. Fairn's terrible, so it'd be kind of tough for them to give her a layup even if they wanted to. But Lapilus versus Taha should be another fun fight. I know Taha's on a bit of a skid, but again, I don't think the guy's a horrible fighter by any means. So overall, I do favor a lot of these hometown guys to win, but overall, I do think they've got some respectable opponents in there. Definitely not Hannah Goldie's or Jordan Levin's we're talking about here. Anyways, it's a pretty solid card. A little tricky, though, but I'll break it down the best I can. So yeah, without further delay, let's get right into breaking down this card. And kicking off the card, we have Ziam versus Michal Figlak, and Figlak's the minus 200 favorite. Ziam is the plus 170 underdog, and we'll take a look at Ziam first, who is a very tall, rangy kickboxer, very, very big frame for the division. He's got a nice jab, nice low kick, but very, very low volume, and I think part of the reason why is just he gets taken down a lot, but even against Vendramini, where, he wasn't taken down too much early in the fight, he wasn't throwing too much at distance, he was throwing a lot of jabs and hip feints, but never really followed up with much or really sat down on his shots either. So overall, I don't think that Ziam's a particularly great minute winner. And on top of that, he does give up takedowns in control time. He's been pushed up against the cage for extended periods. Don Madge was able to do that against him. Jamie Malarkey was able to control him for large portions of the fight. Vendramini was able to take him down and was smashing him in the third round. And then obviously he's coming off of a very quick finish by McKinney, who, was able to just take him down, beat him up a bit, and then kind of just cut right through him. Granted, that's kind of what McKinney does, but, he did it with, I'd say, relative ease against Ziam. And honestly, that ended up being, I'd say, the only fun fight in Ziam's career at the UFC level. But he's going up against Figlak, who, he's coming in short notice for this fight, coming in from the Cage Warrior scene. Does seem like a pretty well-rounded fighter, very aggressive, pressure-heavy style, likes to get in his opponent's face, throwing combination, and he does seem to throw with a bit of heat. Not the most devastating striker by any means, but he does push a pretty decent pace, and he does seem to be able to mix in the grappling. But I will say this about Figlak, it does seem like the killer instinct may be a little lacking, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but there was a fight I saw him in where he had his opponent hurt, and instead of just swarming him for the finish, he was kind of content to just take him down and ride him out for the remainder of the round. So, I would like to have seen maybe a little more aggression from him, trying to hunt the finish a little bit, but I guess maybe he didn't want to get caught in something or maybe punch himself out. So I guess he decided to take the safer approach and just grind out the round and get an easy 10-9 round there. But regardless, he did end up winning that fight. So, can't knock him too much for that. But taking a look at this matchup, I definitely do think that Figlak style can give Ziam a lot of trouble. Assuming he does fight the way he usually does. With Figlak, he does like to pressure his opponents, not give him a ton of space to work with. And I do think that that could give Ziam some trouble, seeing as how, Ziam likes his space. He likes to kind of fight at range, really fight behind the jab, really work the feints and the kicks. And I think that if Figlak is able to pressure him effectively, we'll see Ziam really struggle to do that. And on top of that, Figlak does, I think, a decent job of mixing in the takedowns and the trips. I don't think he's a prolific wrestler by any means, but he does mix it all together pretty well. And if he is able to to take Ziam down. Ziam is pretty bad off his back, and I can see Figlak just getting a ton of control time, maybe even getting the finish. I don't think that Figlak's a great grappler by any means, but if this fight does hit the ground, with how deficient Ziam is off his back, I think that something could potentially materialize for Figlak. But again, with Figlak, he's not someone that's out there aggressively hunting the finish. He's not out there trying to hunt the submission or just throw vicious ground and pound or something. He's, I'd say, a pretty risk-averse fighter, someone who is content to just win rounds and win minutes and just kind of play it safe in there. So for those reasons, I do have to side with Figlak here. I just think that he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think that his style could give Ziam a lot of troubles also. Ziam really hasn't shown much upside. He's a low-volume guy. Doesn't seem to have that fight-changing power just yet. I don't think he's really hurt a ton of guys. And he's got pretty poor defensive grappling and poor bottom game. So I got to go with Figlak here. I will say this. He is making his UFC debut, and it is on short notice. And sometimes with these guys making their debuts, and especially on short notice, they might not fight optimally, or they might not look the way they appear, when they're fighting on the regionals. So, I do think that if Figlak fights the way he usually does, this should be a win for him. But, sometimes you get that step up in competition. It's your UFC debut. Maybe the jitters do get to you, and you end up fighting a completely different style, at least for that fight. So while I do think that Figlak is the side, I do think that Ziam will pose a pretty unique challenge to him. And, Figlak coming in short notice, taking that step up, I do think that there's a chance maybe it ends up being a bit more of a competitive fight than make it out to be. But official pick, I'm going to go with Figlak here. Figlak by decision. And in the next fight, we have a very intriguing matchup between Benoit Saint-Denis and Gabriel Miranda. A bit of a mirror matchup, if you will, but not a ton of lines out. I think on average, you're getting Saint-Denis around like minus 200, Miranda about plus 170. And we'll start with Saint-Denis, the slightly more proven UFC level fighter. So with Saint-Denis, he is a very aggressive grappler. The striking, I think, is still very unpolished. Generally, he's just kind of throwing bombs on the feet, and not a ton of footwork coming from him either. I've seen him just chase guys around the cage before, and he's quite hittable himself. But with Saint-Denis, he is very tough. He's very durable. Has shown, I'd say, pretty solid cardio also. On top of that, he does seem to be quite explosive. He's able to kind of just punch his way into the clinch, get his hands on his opponents, and just rip him to the ground. And generally, he does a pretty good job of getting fights there. And just a fun little stat from the fight against Stoltzfus. The fight lasted 6 minutes and 32 seconds, and of those 6 minutes and 32 seconds, Saint-Denis was able to get 5 minutes and 44 seconds of control time before eventually getting the submission. And even on the regionals, he's tearing through guys. He's able to just rip him to the ground and just get the submission on him. He is pretty aggressive with hunting the submission, and he does have some pretty nasty ground and pound. Did struggle a little bit against Zaleski dos Santos in his UFC debut, but that was his debut, and it was against a proven veteran in Zaleski, so not an easy fight for him, and not a fight I'll knock him too much for. If anything, I thought he showed tremendous toughness and heart in that fight, so I do think there's a lot to build off of with Saint-Denis, and he is going up against Miranda, who I think shares a lot of traits with Saint-Denis, right? Miranda does appear to be a very aggressive grappler himself. We'll look to just get this fight to the ground, look to take the back, hunt the submission. That said, I do think that between the two, Saint-Denis is probably the more physical guy, probably a bit more explosive also. I have seen Miranda just get reversed as well. Didn't look particularly great off his back in those situations. But beyond that, I haven't seen too much tape on Miranda. So just based off of what I've seen from both guys, I do have to lean the Saint-Denis side. I think that he might just be the better grappler, but I think what it comes down to is just the physicality. I think that Saint-Denis is going to be the much stronger guy, way more explosive in there. And on the feet, I think that I might actually favor Saint-Denis a little bit more in that. I feel like he's got a little more power in his punching. But if this does hit the ground, I think I might favor Saint-Denis there. So I think the line's somewhat justified here. Saint-Denis, he's also had a couple more UFC level fights. He's fighting at home. He's fighting with a full camp. And I think he was going to fight a much tougher and much more proven opponent in Giagos. as opposed to Miranda, who is going to be making his UFC debut. So I like Saint-Denis in this spot. And the thing with Saint-Denis is the guy's an absolute dog in there. He will fight for your money. He's going to go hard in there. And, he's not going to quit either. So I do like the Saint-Denis side. I like everything that he brings to the table. And I think that potentially he might just be a better version of Miranda in this matchup. So give me Saint-Denis by round 2 submission. Although I think the decision may be live also, just because I don't think Miranda's been submitted. And if his grappling holds up, or if his defensive grappling holds up, and he's able to defend the submission attempts of Saint-Denis, he might just end up surviving to a decision. It might end up just being Saint-Denis getting a ton of control time. But I think another factor here may just be the cardio. Saint-Denis does push a pretty intense pace, and if Miranda isn't able to keep up, he might just get broken in that second and third round. So I think this is a fight that might be a little volatile in terms of, whether or not it's going to go to a decision. But I'm leaning Saint-Denis by round 2 submission here. But again, wouldn't be surprised if Miranda was able to somehow survive to a decision here. But official pick is going to be Saint-Denis. I do think he gets it done here. And in the next fight, we have Ricardo Ramos versus Danny Henry, and Ramos is the minus 410 favorite. Henry is the plus 340 underdog, and we'll start with Henry first, who I honestly don't know what the deal is with this guy. I thought he might have retired or have gotten cut. He hasn't fought in over 2 years now, and honestly, outside of the Tamer fight, all of his fights have ended in the first round, so not quite sure what to make of this guy. He does seem to have a bit of power in his hands, but his strikes kind of have a pretty big windup. He's not very tight, but he can pack a punch. The chin seems a little suspect also. We saw Ige hurt him pretty bad. Even Tamer had him on the ropes early, but Tamer just wasn't able to really keep a pace and ended up dropping the last 2 rounds. So overall, I do think that Henry's kind of a killer-be-killed fighter. And while I do think he's got some power in his hands, he does seem to be pretty weak defensively, and does seem to have some potential durability issues also. And he's going up against Ramos, who is, I'd say, a pretty well-rounded fighter. Someone who I think does prefer to strike, but can mix in the grappling. Can be inconsistent with it. Would like to see him push it a little bit more. But on the feet, I do think his striking is quite serviceable. He's got pretty quick hands. Really likes to go for those spinning elbows. Does seem to have pretty good timing on it. Obviously, he's coming off of a spinning elbow knockout win. And he was also able to hit that against the hobby a couple of times. There are some slight concerns that I have with Ramos's chin, but I don't think he's chinny or anything. He has been dinged a couple times though. The lead leg is also there to be chopped, but I just don't know if Henry's really going to be the guy to take advantage. I think that Henry overall is still a pretty basic fighter, and especially with his time off, I don't know if he's really adapted to, I guess, the new meta. And I do think that the ring rust is going to be pretty real for him, especially at his age and at his caliber. So yeah, I think Ramos is the side here. I think that he's going to be the quicker fighter in there, the more active fighter, much younger. And I do think he's going to be the better grappler also. On top of that, he's coming off of a full camp. Henry, he does have a decent size advantage, but I don't think he uses it really well. He just seems to have a bit of power. So I'm going to go with Ramos in this spot. I think he likely gets it done inside the distance. I think I'm going to go with just round 1 submission for Ramos. I think he largely has Henry beat in most areas of the fight. And honestly, I'd say outside of Henry landing a bomb early or something, I don't really give him too much of a chance of winning this. I think Ramos is able to maybe hurt Henry early, maybe even just take him down and submit him. I think that there's a lot of paths to victory here for Ramos. Overall, I just think he's the better fighter. He's the fighter in his prime, whereas with Henry, he is kind of aging a bit, and combined with the long-ish layoff, I do think it's a bit of a recipe for disaster. It's just a combination that I generally don't like. And he's not like some high-caliber fighter, an elite-level fighter that's able to stay sharp out of camp and has that experience to fall back on. Henry's, I think, a pretty middling fighter to begin with. So yeah, not a ton of great things to say about Henry, unfortunately, but I do think that Ramos takes this. Official pick, I'll go with Ramos to win in round 1. And I kind of do like this fight to end inside the distance also. Either Henry's able to land something big early and take Ramos out, or more realistically, I think Ramos is able to land something and either knock him out or just choke him out. I think that Henry's honestly just a little slow in there also. I think he's defensively a little lax, and I don't think the chin's all that great either. So all these things put together, I think that is a recipe for Ramos to get the finish. But official pick, I'll go with Ramos by round 1 submission. And moving along, we have Abusupiyan, Magomedov versus Dustin, Stoltzfus, and Magomedov's the minus 255 favorite. Stoltzfus is the plus 215 underdog. And we'll start with the UFC newcomer and sizable favorite in Magomedov first. With Magomedov, he is a pretty rangy kickboxer, pretty insane frame for the division, honestly. That said, though, he doesn't seem like someone that will just play on the outside and look to pick you apart. He's very aggressive. He's very pressure heavy. He will blitz into the pocket and throw some pretty wild strikes in there. I've seen him throw some jump kicks. It does seem to have some power. I've seen him pick guys up and slam them. I don't know how much wrestling and grappling upside he has overall, but he does seem pretty physical. He does seem like a decent athlete. But by and large, he does generally prefer to strike in there. And overall, I do think he's a pretty fun action fighter. I haven't seen too much from him in terms of the takedown defense and the get-ups, which I think is going to be pretty important here because he is going up against Stoltzfus, who is primarily a grappler. The striking from Stoltzfus, not that great. I think he's pretty stiff on the feet. The footwork's not that good. And I just think that the hand speed of Stoltzfus a bit below average also. And on top of that, the guy is pretty hittable. I think that on the feet, it's definitely Magomedov. Magomedov is going to be, I think, the much harder hitter. He's going to be the much taller ranger guy, and I think he's just the more technical striker overall. But Stoltzfus, he does his best work when he's able to hit takedowns, get top control time. We saw him do that against Grant. A solid victory that he's coming off of. He was able to control GM3 for a good chunk of the first 2 rounds also before getting submitted, but he did show a decent top game. So I do feel that there is potentially a path here for Stoltzfus. I don't think that Magomedov's really been tested on the ground. He did get submitted a few times earlier in his career, but that was a very long time ago. That said, though, Magomedov does have some, I guess, built-in takedown defense in that he is quite tall for the division, so it might be hard to take him down. So unless he's got very, very poor balance or something, I think that Stoltzfus might have some trouble hitting takedowns on Magomedov here, although we definitely are extrapolating a little bit on this information. That said, though, as far as an official pick for this fight, I think I do have to side with Magomedov. I think the line is a tad wide in that we have a guy in Magomedov who, even though he does have pretty extensive experience on the regionals, he hasn't really been tested all that much in terms of the takedown defense and the grappling. But I do think that there's going to be a pretty massive edge for Magomedov on the feet here. I think Stoltzfus is going to have to hit takedowns and get at least 3-4 minutes of control time in each round to be able to win those rounds. And on top of that, Stoltzfus isn't exactly the most active guy on top either. So I think this is going to be a pretty tough fight for Stoltzfus because I do think he's pretty outgunned on the feet. And on top of that, he is going to be making a somewhat quick turnaround, which I'm generally not a big fan of. It is also a short notice fight for Stoltzfus, so he's not going to have that full camp compared to Magomedov. On top of that, he's making a relatively quick turnaround, so I think that it's going to be a bit of a tough fight for him. So official pick, I'm going to go with Magomedov by round 1 knockout. Overall, I just don't really like the striking game of Stoltzfus. I think he's just a little hittable. I think he's a little too stiff. And against a tall, rangy kickboxer like Magomedov, I think that Magomedov is going to be able to line something up big and potentially hurt him and knock him out. I mean, if Magomedov is able to land some of the shots that Dwight Grant was able to land on Stoltzfus, I can see him just putting him out. So I got to go with Magomedov in this spot, but I don't know if I'd recommend laying the juice just because I do think there is a path to victory for Stoltzfus, but ultimately I got to go with Magomedov here and Magomedov to win by round 1 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Nassourdine Imavov versus Joaquin Buckley, and Imavov's the minus 245 favorite. Buckley's the plus 210 underdog, and pretty exciting fight here, honestly. Definitely not an easy matchup for Imavov, despite what the line would say here. But we'll take a look at Imavov, who is primarily a striker. He's got very sharp striking. He's got a quick 1-2. Does like to paw the jab out there. He moves well. He's got good footwork, and I do think he's a pretty dynamic striker overall. I've seen him look for that flying knee against aggressive opponents who are blitzing in, and he does have a pretty sneaky front choke series also. So overall, I do think he's a pretty dangerous fighter. I do have some questions about his cardio. I don't think that he's necessarily a gasser per se, but he hasn't looked fantastic in decisions. I think he is 2-2 overall in him, and he does noticeably fatigue later in fights. Has been able to fight through it, but it is worth noting that I do think he slows down. And he's going up against Buckley, who has had some pretty variable performances also. Sometimes his cardio looks good, sometimes it doesn't. But with Buckley, he is a pretty heavy hitter. He's got a very stocky build. Will look to kind of blitz in and throw in combination. Look to kind of explode and reload with it. He has shown he could wrestle a bit also, but I don't think he's a great wrestler, and I don't think he's got great wrestling cardio. I think the only fight I've seen him aggressively go to it was against Abdulrazak Al-Hassan, but that was a fight. If you guys remember, it was ended up being just a very sloppy fight. Ended up being a very close fight, but beyond that, I don't think he's really aggressively pursued takedowns. But it is something he could kind of mix in there. But again, not really his A game. And overall, I think Buckley's a decent fighter who's probably going to hang around in the UFC for a while, but there are a few things that I don't really like about Buckley, and it's that, or just a few tendencies that I don't really like from Buckley, is that he can dip his head a bit when he's blitzing in, and he does drop his hands, and he does throw big looping punches. He's southpaw, so I feel like all these things, it does leave him open to getting clipped. He obviously got head kick knocked out by DiChirico, was able to time him, but I'd say even against Ohoyo, he had a hard time really closing the distance against a tall, rangy kicker in Hoyo, who's, he's threatening with the knees, threatening with like the head kicks. And Buckley, he did get knocked out early in his career, got clipped clean coming in, so I do think that Buckley leaves a lot of openings to get hit, and against a very dangerous striker in Imavov, who I do think is actually pretty good at, adjusting in fight and making reads, and, he's got pretty good timing. I feel someone like Imavov could definitely take advantage. I think that Imavov could time and catch Buckley in this spot. Imavov, he does have some really good straight punches. He does look for that knee up the middle. So I just feel that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Imavov to land something big and hurt Buckley, maybe even knock him out. And Buckley, he has been knocked out a few times. So I do think that the finish for Imavov is very live here. And even if he isn't able to put Buckley out cold, Imavov does have a very nasty front choke series that he could snatch up the neck of Buckley if Buckley isn't completely out. So I do like Imavov to get it done inside the distance here. It could get interesting if Buckley decides to wrestle. We have seen Imavov taken down and controlled, but that was against Haas, who I think is a much better wrestler than Buckley. And Haas, I actually think, is a pretty talented fighter. It's just his chin lets him down, and the cardio subpar. But skill for skill, Haas is actually a pretty good fighter. That said, if Buckley is able to aggressively pursue the wrestling, it could be an interesting fight, especially if he's able to keep it somewhat competitive standing. And on the feet, while I did say that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Haas or for Imavov to land some big strikes, I do think that Buckley could make it pretty competitive, right? Because I do think Buckley's a decent striker. The only thing is, while Buckley technically I think has the longer reach, he doesn't really use it as effectively as Imavov. Imavov obviously going to be the taller guy, but Imavov I think does a much better job of kicking and throwing down the pipe, as opposed to Buckley, who's throwing big looping shots in there. And when that happens, I tend to favor the guy who's throwing those, sharp, straight punches. So the pick for me is going to be Imavov. I'm going to go with Imavov by round 1 knockout. And up next, in what appears to be the featured prelim bout, we have a very high-level fight, a potential title eliminator between Zarah Fairn and Ailin Perez. No rankings for this division, but if there were, this would essentially be, I think, number 2 versus number 3. And the last two ladies to have beaten Fairn ended up getting a title shot, so a win here for Perez would make her a pretty legit contender for the division. But as far as this matchup goes, I'll keep it pretty short because honestly, I think this is a pretty bullshit fight in a bullshit division. So we'll take a look at Fairn first, who, in my opinion, is just a terrible fighter. I think that her striking is horrendous. She's got no technique at all. She's throwing arm punches. She's trying to club her opponents in there. She seems to close her eyes in some exchanges. Isn't able to defend a body lock takedown. She's completely lost off her back. Just overall is not a good fighter at all. I don't think she's looked good for a single second in the cage. I mean, Megan Anderson was able to take her down relatively easily. And once it did hit the ground, it was honestly kind of comical how it played out. It looked like Fairn kind of just turned into Anderson and basically gave her full mount. It didn't even look like Anderson was trying to get there, and Fairn basically just handed Anderson that on a silver platter. And the funny thing is, Fairn somehow got the reversal and still ended up getting triangled in there, so she's a terrible fighter. And on the other side, we have Ailin Perez, who she's out here. She's fighting biker chicks in a warehouse out in Argentina. I mean, there's a fight. She's fighting some lady in what looks like a 15-foot octagon on a jigsaw mat. So, I mean, it's pretty crazy stuff out here. Doesn't really matter, though, because all I was looking for with Perez is if she can hit takedowns and if she's got a top game, which, as it turns out, is really all she does, right? With Perez, she does have a nice body lock trip. She's got some vicious ground and pound, and that's largely her game. And she's looked good doing it. Granted, it's against some very low-level fighters. But at the end of the day, this is Zarah Fairn we're talking about. Technically, a bit more UFC experience, but she's losing every single second of those fights. So realistically, the only experience she has is she's got more experience getting her ass beat at the UFC level. But stylistically, I got to favor Perez here. We have one fighter who's got a very grapple-heavy approach, someone who's got a very nasty top game versus another fighter who's got a very shaky takedown defense, very poor bottom game. So naturally, I am inclined to take the fighter who's going to look to aggressively hit takedowns here. And Perez, on top of that, Perez, she's been a bit more active, whereas with Fairn, she's taken lots of time off. And at 35, I doubt that she's making a ton of improvements. I will say this, though. Fairn does seem to have a decent size advantage. And some of the ladies that have been taking Fairn down are pretty big, right? In Spencer, who is, I think, a pretty solid grappler. And Megan Anderson, who, while I don't think is a phenomenal grappler, is definitely one of the bigger ladies in the division. Whereas with Perez, well, she is aggressive. She's going to be a bit on the smaller end here. And something else I do want to add is both Spencer and Anderson, when they were able to initiate the takedown on Fairn, they were able to kind of just fall into mount against her and was able to get the ground and pound TKO or the submission in Anderson's case. And so while I do think that Perez is probably going to hit takedowns there and get top control time, I don't know if she's going to be able to just fall into mount like Spencer and Anderson have been able to. But again, I wouldn't be completely surprised. I don't think that Fairn's a good fighter at all. But official pick, I'm still going to go with Perez here. I'm going to go with Perez by round 1 TKO. I think when she's able to get on top of Fairn, she's just going to be able to unload on her and probably get her out of there. I think the only thing you could really give to Fairn in this fight is that she's going to be the bigger fighter, but I don't think she's shown tremendous balance or anything. And Perez, I think, has shown okay grappling cardio. Most of her fights end inside the distance, but there was a fight that got extended into the third round that I think she should have won. It ended up being a loss for Perez, but that was a fight that it was an illegal knee, basically, and I think her opponent just wanted the easy way out, the easy W. But I do think that Perez was on her way to winning that fight, and it looks like she does have a decision win in there. But I do think that if this fight does somehow get out of that first round, I still do favor Perez to be able to win minutes going into that second and maybe even third round. So give me Perez here. Official pick, I'm going to go with Perez by round 1 TKO. And moving along, we have a very high-octane featherweight fight between Nathaniel Wood and Charles Jourdain. And Jourdain's the minus 135 favorite. Wood is the plus 115 underdog. And this should be a pretty fun fight between guys making relatively quick turnarounds. But we'll start with Wood first, who, he's a good volume striker. The guy's just constantly working. He's got pretty dynamic striking. Does a pretty good job of mixing it up. Does really like to kick at the legs. And, he can put combinations together. Not the most power, but, he can push a pretty high pace. And he is capable of mixing in the wrestling. It's not his A game necessarily, but it is something that he's got in his back pocket to go to. And this is going to be the second fight for Wood at the featherweight division. Obviously, he looked really sharp against Rosa, but at the end of the day, it's Charles Rosa we're talking about here. I mean, it was basically target practice for Nathaniel Wood out there, so I'm not sure if you could take too much from that. Wood didn't look completely outsized in there, and he did look sharp, so I guess it is more of a positive, but I don't know if you could really, take too much from that performance, all things considered. But, he's going up against Jourdain here, who is going to pose much more of a threat on the feet. Jourdain, a come-forward action fighter himself, very dynamic, someone who's going to look to throw flying knees in there, spinning attacks, and is someone who will just get into a brawl with you. Jourdain, he does like to push a pace also, and he just has a penchant of turning these fights into scraps, and it does leave him open to getting tagged, which, I don't really like, right? He does take a lot of damage, but by and large, his durability does check out, and so does his cardio. And with Jourdain, he does just have nonstop forward pressure, and a lot of times he's able to just break guys in there. But I'd say the big issue with Jourdain really is going to be the takedown defense. He really struggles, getting taken down and controlled. But I don't know if Wood's going to be a massive threat here. Again, Wood can wrestle, but, it's not really his A game. And historically, he's not really like just smothering guys or anything, right? And a lot of the guys that have been out wrestling and out controlling Jourdain have been just some really big guys who can actually wrestle and grapple. Guys like Burgos, who does have a pretty underrated grappling game. Rosa, a very well-rounded guy, but also just a massive guy for the division. I think he's like 6 feet tall or something. And then same with Feely, who's a massive guy for the division and can also wrestle. So all big guys in there, whereas in this spot, Jourdain might actually be the guy with the size advantage for once, because Wood, he is moving up from bantamweight. Wood, he is a pretty big bantamweight, but at featherweight, at featherweight, I don't think I don't know if he's going to have the size over a lot of guys here. Regardless, I do think this is going to be a pretty fun fight. Overall, I kind of lean Jourdain just because, I think that Jourdain, he tends to thrive in these firefights. He is able to wade into the fire, take some big shots, and return with some big shots, whereas with Wood, I don't know if I can necessarily say the same. He did go to war once against Casey Kenny, ultimately lost that fight. But I also think that Jourdain's going to hit much different than Casey Kenny. And the level of competition for Jourdain, I kind of rate a little higher than Woods. But overall, I do think this is going to be a pretty competitive fight. I'm not too confident on either side. I can see this just being really back and forth. I think Wood may have the speed advantage, but overall, it's kind of hard to say just because we haven't really seen Wood fight too many featherweights in there. Anyways, I do think this is a pretty close fight, pretty fun fight. Not a fight I'll be too invested in. Probably just going to sit back and really enjoy this one because I do think it'll be a banger. And I kind of do favor it to go the distance, but with both guys throwing down and pushing an insane pace, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a late finish on either side. But official pick, I'm going to go with Jourdain here. Jourdain by decision. And moving right along, we have Taylor Lapilus versus Khalid Taha. And Lapilus is the minus 330 favorite. Taha is the plus 270 underdog. And we'll start with the favorite in Lapilus, who is actually making his return to the UFC. Not entirely sure why he got cut to begin with. I believe he was like 3-1 at the UFC level. But with Lapilus, he is a pretty solid striker. He's beaten guys on the regionals who I think are pretty good fighters, guys who have actually gone on to the UFC, guys like Nate Maness and Josh Hill, who's actually doing pretty well over at Bellator. And he's beaten, some ex-UFC fighters in Wilson Hayes. And his only losses have actually, in my opinion, been to some UFC caliber opponents. Bibulatov back in the day, Perez back when he was in the UFC, and most recently to Lavrentiev, who I think is UFC bound. I'm not entirely sure what his deal is, but he is supposedly training partners with Jan, and I do think he's a pretty solid fighter. So overall, I do think that Lapilus is a UFC caliber fighter. He's got great striking, good distance management, good shot selection, a very pressure-heavy style. I wouldn't necessarily say he's got one-punch knockout power, but it does seem like he's got some power in his hands. Opponents definitely do react to the shots coming their way, and I do think that they overall seem to respect his power. He's shown 3-round cardio, pretty solid durability, and Lapilus does have pretty big frame for the division. He's pretty tall and pretty long. But he's going up against Taha, who is on a pretty rough skid himself. But, Taha, I do think he's a decent boxer. He's got some pretty quick hands. He's quick on the counter. Definitely does have some power also. Very explosive. Although it doesn't seem like it's really translated all that much at the UFC level. Potentially could have been the USADA expansion, but could also have just been a function of him not really being able to stuff a takedown. Because in a number of his losses, he's getting taken down in controlled. The only fight that it didn't really happen in was against Boston Salmon, who he did starch in 30 seconds. So, that fight never really got to play out. But we did see him hurt some other guys on the feet, like Bruno Silva as well. So I do think that Taha, when he's given the opportunity to, can be a pretty dangerous striker. But Taha's actually faced some pretty stiff competition, in my opinion. Morozov, pretty solid wrestler, kind of a smothering top game, very wrestle heavy. And then Barcelos, just a very high level guy, one of the more underrated guys in the division, very well rounded, was able to box with Taha and was able to hit takedowns also. And then against Narimani, he was given up. Taha was given up a lot of size in that fight, and I believe it was up a weight class also. So not going to knock him too much for that performance. And he does technically have a win over Bruno Silva. That fight, I believe, was overturned. I think that was when he got his PED suspension, and does have a quick finish over Boston Salmon. And I feel like for this matchup, both guys are probably going to give each other the fight they want. It's going to be a striking affair. And so I do suspect we're going to probably get a better showing from Taha. Lapilus is going to be the taller, rangier guy. He's also the one who's on a pretty hot streak right now, so he is surging a little bit. But I feel the line is a bit wide where it is now. I mean, where it is now, it would lead you to believe that Lapilus is going to just go out there and murder Taha, or just at least dominate him pillar to post, which I don't really know if that's going to be the case here. I do think it's going to be a pretty competitive fight. I do favor Lapilus. I think that, he's been doing pretty well. He's going to be making his, second run in the UFC. He wants to give a better showing of himself to prove that he really belongs here. And I do think he's got some physical tools on the feet that, should give him the advantage. He's going to have the reach. He's going to have, I think, the volume also. But I think in terms of maybe the pure speed and the power, that might go to Taha. I think that Taha could maybe land some big shots on Lapilus. And especially since this is going to be probably a 15-minute striking affair, he probably will get some opportunities. And Taha, he used to be a pretty prolific finisher on the regionals. He knocked Boston Salmon out. He hurt Bruno Silva a couple of times. And beyond that, hasn't really been able to show too much of his striking. So I do think that we'll see a bit of an improvement here, or at least a more competitive fight. That said, though, the pick ultimately is still going to be Lapilus for me. I think he's going to be able to win it on volume. Taha, he may have some moments in this fight, but I do think that overall we're going to see Lapilus land a bit more. I think he's going to do a pretty good job of maintaining the range, picking his shots in there, and likely be able to just out-volume Taha to a 3-round decision. I think that this being in Paris is going to help Lapilus as well. He's going to be the local guy there, so he's going to have the crowd on his side. I'm going to go with Lapilus here. Lapilus by decision. And in the next fight, we have Nasrat Haqparast versus John Makdessi. And Haqparast is the minus 195 favorite. Makdessi's the plus 170 underdog. And we'll start with Haqparast, who's a pretty pressure-heavy fighter. He's solid on the counter. He can put combinations together. He's got a nice, tight, high guard, but I do think he struggles a bit when he's on the back foot. We saw that against Green in his most recent fight, and against Hooker as well to an extent. Granted, this was against, two, I'd say, pretty solid opponents, two, I think, top 15 guys. I don't know if Green was ranked at the time, but I do think Green is like a pretty legit fighter. But he's going up against Makdessi in this fight, who is a veteran of the sport, right? And Makdessi is coming off of a war with Bahamundes, where a bit of an atypical performance for Makdessi. He's more of a karate guy, very kick heavy in his approach, more of a point fighting style, but did show a lot of aggression in the Bahamundes fight. And I mean, he has shown flashes of it in previous fights, but largely he is looking to kind of just point fight in there, use his footwork to stay on the outside, work the kicks. And, sometimes it can be a little low volume for him. But I do think this is a pretty interesting fight in that, going into this fight, I thought I'd be a bit more on the Makdessi side, especially with where the odds are at now, and coupled with the fact that Haqparast really just hasn't looked particularly great lately. But the thing is, I think what it really comes down to is just how aggressive Haqparast is going to be in this fight. He was kind of content to take the back foot against Hooker and Green, which I don't think was a great idea for him. Haqparast just honestly looked kind of lost out there. I think Haqparast does best when he's the one pushing forward, when he's the one pressuring. And I think if he could do that here, I think he can have a good amount of success. Just get in the face of Makdessi. Don't give him too much space to work those kicks, and just look to box him up, up close, in boxing range. I do favor the speed and the power of Haqparast. I don't think Haqparast has got, insane power or anything, but, he has dropped some pretty durable guys in there. He has gotten knockouts, and Makdessi is someone who's been knocked out before. And on top of that, Makdessi, he's getting a little older. I think he's 37 years old, year and a half long layoff. I can see him maybe losing a bit of a step in this fight. And if Haqparast is just making this a dogfight with him, I do think that Haqparast has a good chance of coming out ahead here. But again, this, I think, largely comes down to how aggressive Haqparast is and what his game plan is going to be coming into this fight. I think that if he's able to pressure like he usually does, I think he'll have a lot of success here. But if he's content to just take the back foot and let Makdessi kind of dictate the pace of the fight and dictate the exchanges, he could just get outpointed like he did in his last couple of fights. But I think that this is definitely a winnable matchup for Haqparast. He got that step up in competition against guys like Hooker and Green. Not the best circumstances for him either. But now I think that he's getting a bit of a step down in competition. He'll have a full camp for this fight against someone in Makdessi who is getting a bit up there in age, pretty inactive. And, while Makdessi, he is coming off of a war against Bahamundes and did win that fight, Makdessi is someone who is totally capable of just laying an egg out there sometimes as well. So while I wouldn't hate on anyone taking a shot on Makdessi here, especially at where the odds are at, I don't know if I'll quite get to him myself. If anything, I might just poke the Makdessi by decision for a really, really small amount, just because, I do think that Makdessi may have a chance to just kind of outpoint Haqparast, and Makdessi's not a prolific finisher himself, but I do think that Haqparast takes this. I think the speed and the youth and potentially the aggression and just Haqparast being a little more active, I think are going to be big enough factors here to help him edge it in this fight. A lot of these older guys just have not been having a good go of it lately, and while I don't think Makdessi's on like a tremendous decline or anything, he's getting a bit up there in age in a lower weight class. So official pick, I'm going to go with Haqparast. Haqparast by decision. I don't know if he's knocking Makdessi out. Makdessi, he has been knocked out a couple of times before, and while I do think that Haqparast can pack a punch, I don't think he's like a prolific finisher by any means. So I think he could have Makdessi wobbled at certain points, but I don't know if he's going to get the knockout. So official pick, I'm going to go with Haqparast by decision. And moving into the next fight, we have Alessio Di Chirico versus Roman Kopylov, and Di Chirico's the minus 125 favorite. Kopylov is the plus 105 underdog. And we'll start with the slightly more UFC tenured guy in Di Chirico. So Di Chirico making his return after that brutal head kick knockout by Abdulrazak Al-Hassan. He did take a year off after that, which is good to see. But overall, I'm someone that's been pretty lukewarm about Di Chirico. Di Chirico, he's a somewhat well-rounded fighter. The issue with him is he's just not really great anywhere. He's kind of low volume on the feet. And on top of that, he doesn't seem like he's got a ton of power either. So it's not like he's got big moment-winning ability on top of the fact that he's somewhat low volume. He can mix in the wrestling, but he has really only had wrestling success against guys with pretty poor takedown defense, in my opinion. And while he has been with the UFC for a while, I don't think he's really got a signature win. He does have a knockout win over Buckley, but that was a head kick, which I don't know if you could take too much from that. It happened pretty early in the fight also. So I guess Julian Marquez might be his best win, but that was the fight where Marquez supposedly tore his lat, which was the reason he took that long layoff, and it did go to a split decision also. So, he went to a split with a guy who tore his lat, right? So I don't know how much you could really take from that. But beyond that, he's kind of looked like a pretty middling fighter, if I'm being honest. And on the other side, we have Kopylov, who has struggled a bit at the UFC level himself. Winless so far, 0-2. But with Kopylov, he is primarily a striker. He stays pretty light on his feet. Does seem to have somewhat quick hands, a nice stiff jab, decent low leg kick. But where he really has struggled is going to be in the grappling, the takedown defense. Obviously, the submission loss to Roberson was a big red flag in that. Well, Roberson, he does have a few submission wins on his record. Roberson is a kickboxer, and I believe Roberson has since been cut from the promotion, so not a loss that's aged really well. And beyond that, Kopylov, he did get taken down by Duraev and got mauled in that second round there. He did show a lot of toughness and heart in that fight, but at the end of the day, he did get mauled pretty badly in there. That said, I do think there are some decent takeaways, right? He was able to, I think, hurt Duraev early. And I actually do think his takedown defense is solid. He's just kind of bad off his back. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that there's a ton of red flags on both sides. I think both guys are somewhat unreliable. With Kopylov, obviously, I think his ground game is a massive liability. I think if Roberson is able to go out there and submit you, I think anything is on the table if the fight hits the ground. DeChirico, I think, is not a good minute winner. He's coming off of a pretty bad knockout as well, where you kind of do have to question where he's at mentally and physically, after that sort of knockout where, mentally you don't know if he's going to be maybe a little more gun shy going into this, and being as low volume as he already is, this could definitely be an issue. And then of course, that's the sort of knockout that could probably be, very bad for his long-term durability or even his durability going into this fight, right? Because, best case scenario, his durability is largely unaffected by it, which I think is unlikely. I think more realistically, it'll be a little easier to rock him and maybe knock him out. So, that's definitely, I think, a bit more of a downside for him. And Kopylov, on the other hand, does seem to have some pop in his shots. He might be the quicker guy also, maybe in terms of the hand speed. He's the slightly longer guy as well. So for all those reasons, I think I have to marginally lean Kopylov. I think that him being a little younger could be a bit of a factor also. So I'm going to slightly lean to the Kopylov side, not with the utmost confidence or anything. Both guys I don't think are very reliable at the end of the day. But I guess I got to go with a younger, fresher fighter, probably a little sharper, a little quicker. The wrestling could be a factor here for DeChirico. He is someone who will mix in the wrestling, but I don't think DeChirico's a super reliable wrestler, nor has he had a ton of success with the wrestling either. I mean, it's something that he kind of mixes in, but it isn't his primary game plan. And I do think Kopylov's first level takedown defense is good enough for him to stuff takedowns and deter DeChirico from just chaining takedowns together or anything. So I'm going to go with Kopylov here. I think that he'll probably land better shots over the course of 15. I think that he'll maybe just have a little more volume also. So I'll slightly lean Kopylov here by decision, but again, not a fight I want to get really invested in. And in the co-main event, we have Marvin Vettori versus Robert Whittaker. And Whittaker's the minus 235 favorite. Vettori's the plus 200 underdog. And then we'll start with the underdog in Vettori first. So Vettori, he is a very well-rounded fighter, in my opinion. Very serviceable in all areas, but not quite elite anywhere. That said, he does do a very good job of mixing it all together. He's a good striker, very meat and potatoes, and a little flat-footed, but he actually does a pretty good job defending. Does a great job of shelling up and parrying. And on top of that, he can mix in the wrestling, the clinch work, and he's got phenomenal cardio and durability. I don't think he's really ever been rocked outside of maybe that Paulo Costa head kick, which looked like it might have annoyed Vettori a little bit. But outside of that, his durability has largely checked out, and he is a pretty big physical dude for the division also. Probably one of the biggest guys in the division outside of Costa. But he is going up against Whittaker, who a very well-rounded fighter himself, primarily a striker. He's got that karate style, darting in and out of the pocket. Solid kicking game, does do a really good job of fighting behind the jab, and he supposedly can wrestle. Also, he's mixed it in a few times, and him participating in the Commonwealth Games gets brought up a lot, but I don't think I've really seen Rob offensively wrestled all that much, at least not aggressively. But he does have pretty good takedown defense, so he does use it defensively quite well. The cardio solid. I think the durability is okay too with Rob. He has been knocked out and knocked down, but most knockouts have been against pretty sharp strikers in Adesanya and Wonderboy back when he was at 170. But outside of that, he's actually shown some pretty good recoverability. He's been knocked down, but has been able to pop back up pretty quickly. And Rob, he has more or less established himself as the second best fighter in the division. That said, though, Vettori's no slouch here. I definitely think that Vettori can make this a pretty competitive fight like he's known to do. On the feet, I do favor Rob, though. I think that the footwork and the speed will be a difference maker. I think that Rob has better distance management. And the fact that this is going to be a fight in the open stance, I think that Rob does a much better job of kicking to the body and the head. So I do lean Rob standing, but not by a massive margin or anything. I do think that Vettori is going to be able to hang a bit. So I think for Vettori to win this, he'll probably have to mix in some of the wrestling and the clinch work. Rob has shown really good takedown defense historically, and Vettori's not exactly the best wrestler in there, and he's not the most aggressive with it either. But Vettori, he is going to be the bigger, likely more physical guy in there. So maybe if he's able to kind of bully Rob a bit in the clinch, it could look to even up some of the exchanges on the feet. That said, though, I still got to go with Rob here. I think that he likely edges it in the striking exchanges. But again, I do feel the margins are somewhat thin because Rob typically is not blowing guys out. He has had some pretty solid performances. Did have a really good performance against Gastelum, but I think that was a short notice fight for Gastelum, and he was giving up a bit of size in that fight. And Gastelum, I think, is, I don't know, it's weird. He's in a weird spot where I feel like sometimes he's overrated, sometimes he's underrated, but I do think by and large Gastelum is a little overranked. Regardless, what I was trying to get to here is, we have seen Rob fight to some pretty thin margins before, and Vettori is someone who does tend to fight pretty close. Like, I don't think I've ever really seen Vettori get blown out either. So overall, while I do think that Rob should win this fight, I think the margins, again, maybe thin enough that the judges could potentially get this wrong, especially, over here in Paris. So I could see them drop the ball here, and not even egregiously, right? I think that it could be a close enough fight that you could potentially make an argument for, some of the rounds swinging in favor of Vettori. But at the end of the day, I got to go with Rob here. But I think what I like even more in this fight is fight goes the distance. I don't think either guy's prolific finisher. Vettori, I don't think has a ton of stopping power at the UFC level. He's more of like a volume guy, in my opinion. Rob does have a pretty sneaky head kick, but Vettori, he's got a fucking block head. And, Paulo Costa was landing some heavy shots on him. Didn't really phase Vettori all that much. And I don't think that at this stage in his career, his chin's really diminished or anything. So I don't really see a finishing happening on either side here. So I really do like a fight goes. I don't think a submission is going to happen. Neither guy's a big submission threat either. So I do think this fight likely goes the distance, and that's probably the play I'll make on this fight. But official pick, I'm going to go with Rob by decision. And in the main event, we have Ciryl Gane versus Tai Tuivasa, and Gane's the minus 550 favorite. Tuivasa's the plus 385 underdog. And we'll start with Tuivasa, who I think is a pretty fun fighter to watch. He's got power in his hands, and he's got an insane chin. Was able to eat some massive bombs from Derek Lewis, and was somehow able to come back from that. He's got some very nasty low leg kicks also. He's pretty solid in the clinch as well, and overall, I do think his striking's actually improved. I'm watching some of his older fights, and while Tai could definitely still get sucked into a brawl, I think that he's shown a bit more composure in there in recent fights. He's feinting a lot more. He's doing a better job of kind of just picking his shots and setting up his punches. That said, though, I still think there's going to be a massive gap between the two, because with Ciryl Gane, I think we all kind of know that the guy's easily the best kickboxer in the division. I mean, he moves extremely well for the heavyweight division. He's got great footwork, great distance management. He's quick, he's agile, and like I was saying before, I don't think it's really disputable at this point that he is the best striker in the division. You just look at his performances on the feet against some of the other strikers in the division, so to speak, in Rosenstrike and Lewis and Volkov. They all just weren't really able to hang with him. Outside of Volkov, who, he did have his moments, but, I do think that Gane ultimately won that fight. But he was able to fight very cleanly against Rosenstrike, just completely shut down the offense of Rosenstrike, and was able to pretty easily outpoint him over the course of 5 rounds. Was able to stay safe against Lewis and eventually get the knockout. And then again, beat Volkov, I'd say somewhat comprehensively. And more impressively, he turned Ngannou into a wrestler, right? The most feared striker in the division. Had to wrestle to beat Gane. Now, the way in which Gane was giving up the takedowns, that's a different story. But in a 25-minute kickboxing fight, it would have been, I'd say, a pretty easy 50-45 decision for Gane. But he did give up those takedowns, and he did end up losing that fight. However, I don't know if that's going to be much of a threat here. I like Tuivasa, but I just don't see him really having too much of a chance here, unfortunately. On the feet, I just think that Gane's going to be the quicker fighter, the much more technical fighter. And, I guess Tuivasa could land something big. This is heavyweight MMA. Maybe he could just land a big shot on the feet. Maybe he's able to really debilitate the legs of Gane with the kicks. Or maybe he just gets illegally kneed, right? But overall, I just think it's pretty unlikely because, in my opinion, I think Gane's actually fought more technical guys in there than Tuivasa, and I think that he's beaten heavier hitters, or at least guys who are on the same level. And honestly, I hope I don't regret saying this, but I think that Tuivasa's power may be getting a little overrated at this point. He's got power for sure, right? And this is the heavyweight division, but you look at some of the knockouts he's gotten, Derek Lewis, which, Lewis, he's been getting finished a lot lately. And, at first I did think that the knockout was kind of bad because of the way Lewis fell, but just a quick shout out to Eric Betts Fights for this, but he mentioned in, I think, one of his podcasts that Lewis may have wanted out of that fight potentially. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but, obviously he was hurt, and it was also him just deciding he probably didn't want to fight anymore, because when they did cut away from Lewis and cut back to him, he was up and on his feet and did seem okay, right? Kind of similar to his knockout loss against the Russian dude most recently, right? Where he kind of face planted and then was back up on his feet, and a lot of people thought he was able to continue. And I feel like that might have happened in the Tuivasa fight also. So we have that going on with Lewis. And then beyond that, for Tuivasa, he did knock out Sakai, who, decent knockout at the time, but in hindsight, it does seem like Sakai might be a little chinny now at heavyweight. And then Greg Hardy, not exactly known for his durability or his heart. And then Hunsucker, obviously, we know that guy's terrible. And then Stefan Struve, another guy who's been knocked out quite a lot. So, not exactly the most durable guys out there. And Cyril's chin, I think, is somewhat untested. So, maybe he can land something big. But, Cyril's also really fucking good defensively. So, I just don't know if Tuivasa's going to be able to land something clean on Gane. And so outside of that knockout, I just don't know if Tuivasa's got a lot of, minute winning ability, at least against Gane here. I don't know if Tuivasa's going to start shooting takedowns either. So I really do think that Gane should take this. I think he's fully capable of just dancing around Tuivasa for 25 minutes here. But I guess the real question here is, how exactly is Cyril going to get it done here? And I think the decision is probably going to be the obvious pick here, right? Gane is someone who historically is a decisionator. He does fight very clean, very technical in there, doesn't get hit with too much, and he's sometimes content to just play on the outside and just look to outstrike opponents. And Tuivasa, he has shown very good durability throughout his career, so, the initial lean is probably Gane by decision, but there are a couple things I do want to mention. Cyril, he does actually have a few finishes, right? He does really like to attack that heel hook. And if it presents itself, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go for it. And two, I'm just not really sold on the cardio of Tuivasa. I think 5 rounds is going to massively benefit Gane here. Tuivasa's actually only been to a decision twice at the UFC level, once against Arlovsky in a pretty low-paced fight, and then the second time against Ivanov in a fight that he was gassing out pretty badly in that fight. He was slowing down. He was giving up takedowns. And that was a 3-rounder against Ivanov, who is, I'd say, a somewhat undersized heavyweight and someone who doesn't necessarily have the best cardio either. So I do have some, skepticism in terms of Tuivasa going into the 4th and 5th round in this spot. But I do think it's kind of dependent on the pace that Gane is pushing as well. If this is just 100% a striking affair, it could go to a decision. I could see it being somewhat similar to the Rosenstrike fight, where maybe Gane does respect the power of Tuivasa a little bit, and he's kind of content to just shut down the offense of Tuivasa and kind of just pick him apart. So I could see that happening, but I think that if Gane is able to mix in some of the clinch work, and if he's able to pursue the wrestling, which I'm not saying he will, but if it is something he does do here, I think it'll be a massive benefit for him for a couple of reasons, right? One, I think Tuivasa's takedown defense and bottom game is a bit lacking still, and two, if he's able to get off on that wrestling, it will just serve to really drain the gas tank of Tuivasa, who I think doesn't have the best cardio to begin with, and we'll look to mitigate some of the power coming your way from Tuivasa. But I guess my hot take for this fight is I do think we see Gane look to push the wrestling a little bit here. Because the fact is, Gane, he is an elite striker, the best striker in the division, and I suspect he wants continued success in the division. He got so close to UFC gold, but wasn't able to get it because of the takedowns. He got taken down by a striker in Ngannou. Granted, Ngannou's very big, very physical guy, but also there's other guys in the division who are good wrestlers like Curtis Blades, and there's a couple other guys like Stipe who could wrestle. Is getting a little older, but that is something that you do have to factor in here. And according to Cyril's coach in an interview, Fernand Lopez, he did mention that after the Ngannou fight, they did bring in a couple of Dagestani heavyweights to really work on the takedown defense of Gane, and I think by extension, he's probably going to be working on his wrestling also. But look, back to this matchup, I think 100% Gane can just outstrike Tuivasa. I think that would be a very clear path for him. I don't think it'll be too much trouble for him. But I do think that this is going to be a great fight for Cyril to really look to implement other parts of his game if he is indeed working on it, to really get the reps in. And also, the takedown defense of Tuivasa is, I think, very lacking. So I think just from a strategic standpoint, it'd be a great idea to mix it in. On top of the fact that, it is a part of your game that you really do want to start to develop also. So for all those reasons, I think that we see Gane look to maybe push the wrestling. I'm not saying he's going to have a ton of success with it. I'm not saying he's going to go in here and hit 5 or 6 takedowns, but I do think that we do see Gane hit some takedowns, and I do think it's going to be enough to really slow down the cardio of Tuivasa. And so I think if that happens, we see potentially a late finish for Gane here. So obviously the pick for me is going to be Ciryl Gane in this fight, and I think the likely outcome is Ciryl by decision, but I think I'm going to lean towards a late finish for Gane here. I think I'm going to go with a round 5 submission. I can definitely see Tuivasa start to wilt later in the fight, especially if Gane is pushing the pace on him, if Gane is looking to clinch up with him, look to get the wrestling going and really drain the cardio of Tuivasa, because if Tuivasa, who's huffing and puffing in that 3rd round against Ivanov, I think it's going to be much worse for him in that 4th and 5th round against Gane, who I think has got a pretty significant cardio edge. Tuivasa definitely seems like he's improved his conditioning a bit. His skills have improved, since he's joined the UFC. But the truth is, beyond that Ivanov fight, all of his fights have actually ended inside the distance. Most of them have ended inside that 1st round, and almost all of them have ended inside that 1st round and a half. So we really don't know how Tuivasa is going to look, in that 4th and 5th round. So official pick, I'm going to go with Ciryl Gane by round 5 submission. I could definitely see a situation where we see Tuivasa slow down enough, and near the end of the round, we see Ciryl just drop for a meme heel hook or something, like he's shown to do in a number of his fights. So, give me Gane in this spot. Give me Gane by round 5 submission. And that will wrap up the breakdown portion of this podcast. So we'll get right into the recap for the previous event for UFC 278. And, man, what a crazy card we're coming off of. Was able to scrape by with a very teeny tiny profit myself, but overall I'd say it was a pretty solid event, and a lot of the fights did deliver. Of course, it all culminated in the crazy last minute win by Edwards there, which we'll get to shortly. But kicking off the card, we had Daniel Da Silva versus Victor Altamirano. Yeah, I ended up parlaying the under in this fight. Daniel De Silva, just the definition of a killer be killed fighter. I was contemplating, poking Altamirano to win in round 2 or round 3, but the concern was with someone like De Silva, he might just gas himself out in that first round and get finished, which is exactly what happened. So I ended up staying away from that and was able to cash on the under in this fight, which went and cashed with relative ease. Morano got hurt a little bit, but was able to recover and eventually get De Silva out of there. But moving along, Richie Lang versus Jay Perrin. Did have a couple unit shot on Jay Perrin. Not particularly upset with how it played out. It was, I think, a close enough fight to justify betting Perrin at like plus 160. That second round was the swing round, in my opinion. I felt overall it would have been a pretty 50-50 fight, and I feel like it kind of shook out that way. Third round was Perrin all day. First round was Richie Lang, and I thought the second round where Richie Lang landed a few big shots that looked like it might have shaken Perrin up a bit, was able to swing him those rounds. But Perrin did get some top control time also. But yeah, if he didn't get rocked badly, he probably could have won that second round. But yeah, I thought the right guy won this fight. Regardless, I don't think it was a terrible bet by any means. But moving along, Amir Albazi versus Francisco Figueiredo. So I had Albazi parlayed with Maverick, and unfortunately Maverick, the fight wasn't able to happen. Probably would have been a pretty easy fight there, but basically ended up playing Albazi straight there. Was able to cash that, and then I also bet Albazi to win in round 2. In round 3, I thought Figueiredo would be able to survive at least one round before getting finished, but again, similar to someone like De Silva, maybe the cardio is just bad enough, and then the skill discrepancy between the two is big enough that they're just not even able to survive to that second round. So unfortunate there. I was contemplating taking the Albazi inside the distance as well, but ended up just going round 2 and round 3 because I really thought Figueiredo would be able to survive that first round, but unfortunately not. But moving along, AJ Fletcher on Jalusa. I did have a couple units on Lusa, and I also parlayed the fight starts round 3 also, just because I thought both guys pretty tough. Obviously, came a bit close to finishing. They almost lost both bets, but Lusa was able to hang in there. Fletcher looked like he might have emptied the gas tank in that second round and really did not have much in the third, but Lusa looked solid, was able to defend the takedowns, stay alive in there, and then win a pretty comprehensive 29-28 decision. So moving along, Sean Woodson, Luis Saldana, and boy did Saldana show some all-time bad fight IQ in there. Could easily have been a round 1 finish for Saldana had he not just fucked around in there. Yeah, he had Woodson hurt on 2 separate occasions. Hurt really badly too, and then proceeds to just knee him in the head and basically, just throw the fight away. But yeah, it should easily have been a round 1 finish. Woodson bettors kind of dodged a bullet there. Not me though, because I took Woodson inside the distance. I was expecting Woodson to start to pour it on second and third round with how much Saldana slows down, but I think that first round really fucked Woodson up. I think he was basically in recovery mode, rounds 2 and round 3. And I feel that's something people don't talk about a lot. Going all out and throwing a lot of offense tires you out, but getting the shit beat out of you also is really taxing on the cardio also. And Woodson did go for that submission attempt, which might have drained the cardio even more. So unfortunately wasn't able to cash the inside the distance prop. Also had Woodson in round 3 also, but obviously that never really even came close. Really interesting decision though. Honestly, I have no idea how I would have scored it. But yeah, really, really weird scorecards for this fight. But moving along, Leonardo Santos, Jared Gordon. I did take a small poke on Santos to win in round 1. I felt that when Santos is fresh, he'd be kind of live for a knockout, especially against Gordon, who, he's been chinned a few times, so took a small shot there. But Santos, he did not look good. He did not look good in that first round. He looked like he might have been gassed before the fight even started. So, not much else to say there. Gordon didn't look fantastic either, but was able to come away with a decision there. But moving along, Marcin Tybura, Alexander Romanov. So I did end up taking the overs in this fight. I took the over 1.5, and then I also played fight goes the distance. Initially I was thinking about just putting a play on Tybura, and maybe even Tybura by decision, but ultimately what I decided to go with was just the overs, because I just really didn't think that Romanov was going to get the early finish, and if that doesn't happen, I think this fight really easily creeps over the 1.5. Romanov really hasn't shown that he could finish guys that aren't bums, right? And Tybura he's a proven heavyweight, right? He's no Chase Sherman, he's no Rocky Martinez, so not a pushover on the mat. And I just felt that if Romanov wasn't able to get that early finish, it turned into a pretty sloppy heavyweight fight, which ended up happening. But ultimately, I didn't play the Roman or the Tybura money line or Tybura decision prop. Was, I felt that second round would be potentially close, where, if Romanov had enough cardio left in the tank, he'd be able to hit takedowns and maybe win that second round. So instead of just playing a side here, I just decided to play the totals and get a bit of profit that way. But yeah, Romanov, he looked good in that first round, did not look good that second round and third round. But overall, it's kind of hard to see him climbing the rankings with his cardio, honestly. Like, you're going to have to at least be able to wrestle for 2 rounds if you want to start beating guys in the top 10, top 15. But moving along into the main card, we had Tyson Pedro, Harry Hunsucker, and Tyson Pedro early knockout, and nobody was surprised. But beyond that, nothing to really add to this fight. It was a squash match, and Pedro handled Hunsucker like he should have. Uyanan versus Lucy Pudilova. Didn't end up having any action on this fight. Just a very low-level fight. But, I did say whoever was going to be able to get on top would have success. And, of course, it was Pudilova who was able to get into a top position and just kind of go to town on Uyanan, who, man, like I've always said, she's just a terrible fighter. She's not a good striker, and she's horrendous off her back. So good for Pudilova for being able to pick up the win here. But if I'm being honest, I don't think she looked particularly great either. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Pudilova got cut a second time. But moving along, Jose Aldo, Merab Dvalishvili. Yeah, I had a couple units on Aldo. Honestly, not entirely surprised with his performance. I thought Aldo would be able to do what he did in that first round for maybe one more round and be able to win a pretty close decision. But of course, he just wasn't really able to keep up with the pace of Merab, and I think the altitude might have gotten to Aldo. He wasn't really throwing much at all in there. He was very visibly tired after that first round, and he just wasn't able to keep up with the volume of Merab in there. And getting him at only plus 110, definitely not a great bet by any means. But moving along into the co-main event, Paulo Costa, Luke Rockhold. So had a few units tied up in this fight. I had Costa parlayed up, and then I also took Costa to win inside the distance. Not really sure how close he ever came to it. I was a little surprised with Costa's early takedown attempts. I don't know if that was necessarily the best idea. I felt that had he maybe reserved his cardio and just looked to strike with Rockhold, just pressure him early, I feel maybe that would have increased his chances of getting a knockout. The takedowns, great minute winning ability, but will drain the cardio a bit of someone like Costa, who doesn't have the best cardio to begin with, and I feel like that took some of his his finish equity off the table. That said, Rockhold did show some pretty crazy durability and heart in this fight. However, the body language just looked terrible on the Rockhold side. He definitely was looking his age there past that first round. But lastly, we had the main event between Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards. And what a fight that was. It looked like Usman was on his way to winning a pretty clear 49-46 decision. And of course, he gets head kicked into oblivion, right? And, the funny thing was Dean Thomas was on the mic talking about how defeated Edwards looked, about how Usman had broken Edwards in there. And, I was nodding my head in agreement. I thought Dean Thomas was on point with that remark. And then Edwards just goes out there and lands that head kick and puts Usman out. And honestly, even though I lost my bet here, it's just one of those times where you can't even be that upset because of how insane that comeback was. And I don't know if it was me, but it looked like there might have been people leaving the arena between rounds 4 and 5, which I never understood that, right? But regardless, a pretty crazy event, crazy comeback from Edwards. We're probably going to get a rematch here. Would be interested to see how people feel about it, after how this second fight played out. But that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in. And, if anyone knows how to easily convert this into, an actual podcast format and so that I can upload it onto iTunes or something, let me know in the comments below. I've been trying to to actually upload these onto podcasting platforms instead of just YouTube, but haven't really gone around into it. Haven't really had time and not really the motivation to, if I'm being honest. But if anyone's got like a guide or anything on how to do it, that'd be great.